I just wanted to ask because I feel like at some level in India right now we're seeing a clampdown on dissenting voices. So I wanted to ask, do you think filmmaking, and I'm talking about like fiction films, do you think that is a way to circumvent that kind of censorship? And is that something that we are moving towards in terms of films in India?
Um, yes, I think especially with web platforms and the internet being free, I think there are writers who are thinking of fictionalizing things and also telling things in a subtler way. And sometimes these challenges are actually good for artists because you work on your art, and art becomes far more refined when you cannot be direct. So yes, I understand that, direct voices like media, where, journalists have to actually report the truth of a story. When you can't dissent, it becomes extremely difficult because here you have to report. And if the side of I mean, if you, without taking sides, you have to report what is the story. But if you can't report a dissenting story, I guess it becomes extremely claustrophobic for that kind of voice. With creative people, yeah, the advantage that we have is that we have to find subtler ways of expressing, and it has happened throughout history. Wherever we've had, clamped down on dissent, art has actually flourished because we'll have to find more interesting ways of saying things and weaving it into stories and not underlining it. And that's where actually, when I mean, art becomes it gets more refined instead of actually underlining. And so there is a contradiction there.
What are some of the things that we should do to make our characters more relatable, so that as the audiences connect more to the characters, because we do not have so much time to bring out all the characteristics of a character. So what can we do to make our characters more relatable?
When I look at a story which has numbers in it, like, in an earthquake, so many people died, and this is what people suffered. I get informed and I feel, okay, oh, that's really terrible, but it doesn't touch me personally. And but when I see a story of a family, or if of a person, of what she went through or he went through or the child went through, it stays with me for a much longer time. So I feel when we pick up that individual and expand that to its detail is when we emotionally connect and penetrate. And probably that's the way of storytelling. The other thing is that the stories in itself should tell me, what am I trying to say through the story of that person. I don't need to say that I'm telling a story of a widow who also is a sexual being. I don't need to say that in the headline or in at any point in my story. I just tell the story from her emotional journey. And at least, I don't know, as an actor, this is what I have learned as far as storytelling is concerned, and that's where I have seen that most people connect to. um, and it doesn't mean that you have to only, I mean, obviously many people would say that, oh, you keep your head out and your heart in and all. That's actually not true. You need a lot of head to actually create that heart. But I think it's the more personal, the more local it is, the more universal it is, the more penetrative it is, if that answers your question.
What I try to do with, I mean, is very new. It's like I want to bring in that emotional element, because there's one thing that I see which is common for every human being, is an emotional experience. And of course, everybody has very different experiences in all their lives, but all the different human emotions are common for everyone. And I think that as a journalist, trying to put those emotions in the story so that people are able to relate. And then there's that added problem of having to speak with multiple people, so you have quotes, and it just takes away from the piece. And um, so I'm just wondering, how would we reconcile this as journalists when we want to write hyperlocal stories, which don't necessarily, like, again, it goes into the category of features, but I'm just wondering, how would we reconcile all of this and put it in a journalistic piece? Because
I think, I mean, if you ask me, I mean, journalists really have it tough, because on the one hand, you are storytellers, but on the other hand, you're also informers, and, you're also being told that, don't put emotion in it. Let the reader decide which side to take, because when the writer's emotion comes into it, you're guiding the reader to look at it from that point of view. And sometimes, we want journalists not to put their point of view in it, because we want to read a piece just as it is. And I think the problem again comes to, the amount of journalism that one has to do right now, like in today's time, that why is it that if something is not compelling and not happening, then let it not happen. um, why do I have to constantly churn out stories? um, I think in this entire lockdown, what has happened, and a lot of writers in film and in fiction are talking about that, how do we rise above the kind of drama that we've seen in the last 3.5, 4 months, because this is so real, so dramatic, so big, so life changing, everything that's happening. It's not only the pandemic, but lots of things around the pandemic and other stuff. Like every day there's a twist and turn, and there's so much drama that fiction is just going to become, it'll fall flat. Like we can't create more drama than what the real newsroom is creating today, because it's breaking news every day in reality.
yeah,
And so you're getting, like, it's like playing a video game. The adrenaline is so high, and you're so used to drama that just the news of Rani and her, her fantasies, how does it even matter? But that's where I think, that's again, it doesn't matter if it comes from a dispassionate uh, fact narration. It will matter if we can actually get into the psychological world of that character, and if we can have our audiences relive that moment and that journey, when we feel that, oh, this has happened to us. And that's what I guess fiction does. But yes, I mean, I don't know whether I'm answering your question, but I think journalism has a difficulty there, because on the one hand, you're expected to just inform. You're expected to be dispassionate. You're expected to not take emotional sides. And I don't know whether that can happen, because we are also people. Um, and the recently I was co-writing a piece, a project, a story basically about the justice system, and even how, I mean, we all know this, that the justice system, with all its rules and laws and everything so minutely laid down, is still so guided by emotions and culture and how you're actually brought up. And so I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know whether you can escape that.
If you talk about old school journalism, it's almost impossible for you to report as a human being. We would end up being photocopiers of facts.
Yes.
And perhaps that's not what audiences even want us to be.
Right.
What do you think, as filmmakers, do you think there's an association building up, or is going to happen in practical terms in future, to give the visual journalism and visual storytelling happening in filmmaking? You see an association going to happen soon, because as we evolve, journalism evolves, filmmaking evolves, so there has been an association in the past. Do you see an association coming in the recent time?
I think it has. I think it has already begun. The association, from very basic things, like a lot of journalists have actually become writers in films, and they're writing screenplays that come from backgrounds of journalism. And I think many people in film actually prefer journalists who become writers because their research is really thorough, and it's not like it's not just four people sitting in a room and jamming about an idea. It comes from ground realities, it comes from reporting, it comes from research. So the stories have a base in researched reality. So there are a lot of journalists who are becoming screenplay writers. In terms of format of cinema as well, if you see the trends that have especially in world cinema, with the kind of festivals, the films which are doing incredibly well in festivals, they're going more and more into features which almost look like documentaries. They are actually recreated, but they are so real that it doesn't, there is no, I mean, the fictional element is only the frame. That yes, you're choosing to show this frame and not that, but the mise-en-scène is written in such a manner that you're almost into people's lives. And also feature documentaries are a huge thing now internationally, and the audience viewership also. If you look at even OTT platforms, like for example, I only watch feature documentaries. I don't watch fiction. Even though I work in fiction, I find it, because I know how fiction is created, I just find it extremely boring sometimes, because I know this shot has been taken like this and that's how. So it doesn't interest me, and feature documentaries really, really interest me. And there's so much of feature documentary now that's actually made by journalists, and some of those documentaries are amazing. They've taken like 7, 8, 9 years of work to actually follow a particular character and everything that has happened, and to go to the final finale of what happens in that story, to have that sort of diligence. And I think that's another thing that's really sort of gaining a lot of popularity in the West also. Many stories are told better through feature documentaries. There was a film called Man on Wire, which was made a couple of years ago, which was a Academy Award winning film. And it was about a man in the 70s who rope walked the Twin Towers, and without any harness. So he became instantly famous, and he rope walked like a lot of famous buildings at that point of time. And Hollywood loved that documentary so much that they made it into a film, a fiction film. But the fiction never did as well as the feature documentary actually did. The audiences actually related to that real story, and because that had the emotional charge that actually the fiction didn't. So I think that blurred line is something that's already happening. It's happening from both sides, yeah. But if you look at the kind of the films that are getting appreciation in festivals and all, like there was a Marathi film called Court, which was made a few years back, which was a huge success as far as festivals and art house cinema in India is concerned. It was also the formal entry of Academy Awards from our country, and in Marathi language it did quite well in the box office as well. And if you look at that film, it almost feels like these characters are real people that he's filmed. And he's just looking at that particular case. And what he did very interestingly, he's mixed actors and real people. A lot of filmmakers actually do that nowadays, that they mix, actors and the real characters, and you're viewing something which is also sometimes happening in real time. I mean, these experiments have happened in European cinema for many, many years now. But now they are getting, so I'm saying borrowing from feature documentaries, which comes from, news reporting and things like that, we are already doing it in terms of treatment as well. Um, um, and then docu-fictions, mockumentaries. There are also mockumentaries which are being made, that we are taking the form of a docufiction, but basically it's a completely fictional thing, that we are shooting it like a documentary and we are just saying it, oh, I followed this character. And there are a lot of mockumentaries which are also happening, which is what you are saying, the reverse, that the treatment being sort of taken. So of course it is happening. I think in India, because Bollywood is so overpowering in terms of its mainstream existence to what actually exists, all these interesting experiments that a lot of our filmmakers are also doing. It's not only that the Korean or the Chinese or the Iranian and European filmmakers are doing. Our filmmakers are also doing these kind of work, but it kind of remains within the fraternity, within the international film festival circuit. It gets talked about very little in the mainstream entertainment media. And so that's of course an issue, the struggle with the eyeballs and the kind of interest. But now I think with, again, the platforms coming in, some of these films are available on OTT. But there again, I mean, from a practical point of view, what happens is, because the promotion that happens on the OTT platforms are again about these mainstream shows about guys and guns and goons and drugs. So these sort of like gems remain unexplored to a large number of audience.
Thank you, Tanishta. The last question, as I promised, can we look at journalism and journalists from your eyes, your mind, and your heart as a storyteller? And you can be very honest about your look at us, who are journalists and doing journalism.
No, like I said, that I think obviously in features, you can. And I personally actually really like feature documentaries, which are mostly made by really renowned and good journalists, well researched, very diligent, and showing us something. Of course there is a point of view, but it still goes into the detail and all sides of everything that has been covered. And the rigor that they bring into writing, because like I said, a lot of times fiction writers we face that all the time in Bollywood, that you have deadlines and you just come up with an idea. Okay, give me an idea by tomorrow, and then in 15 days give me the first draft. It doesn't work like that. And a lot of times this kind of writing happens in your head and with 5 people sitting in a room and brainstorming. And I personally prefer featured writing, reading or watching that, and the kind of stories that come out of it, because it tells me something about the world. So I can sit here and I can look at a story like in Latvia, and it tells me something real about that world. And I get to know something. I mean, I think that's, whereas human beings, our curious mind is the most interesting thing that we have, which has created great things and the most destructive things as well. But that curiosity of the mind is what is the most significant difference that we have from all other species. So I think they can contribute a lot. And I think the more real they are, the more local they are, it makes it also penetrate and let me know something about another world, which I don't know about. Some of the documentaries, I would say, there's a Chinese documentary called The Last Train Home. It's an amazing documentary. It actually is a great reflection on migration and workers and, aspiration, all those things which actually India is also going through, because, our culturally or the political and economic recent history that we have is quite similar. And so I would recommend a film called, The Last Train Home. I would recommend Man on Wire, amongst, that is something that I sort of mentioned.
Okay, thank you so much, Tanishta, for giving us your time and for being honest and for bearing with us. Thank you very, very
Absolute
much.
pleasure. I actually had a great time. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, and appreciate it very much.
I would look forward to great stories which actually inspire people like us to make films.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.